Welcome back to our Pride Month series, and this week's episode is going to be a little different. See, last week we talked about Magnus Hirschfeld, and then we had the National History Day special on Rudolf Virchow, so, that was a heavy weekend. Let's have some levity. So, this week's scientist is not a good person, and he might actually be a sociopath, or at least, a rich guy who was born into wealth. But, oh my gosh, his life is chaotic, and he just embodies the spirit of be gay, do crimes. So this is Baron Franz Nopsca von Felsos-Vilvas, henceforth just Franz Nopsca, and he was a Hungarian aristocrat and paleontologist in the late 1800s. So Nopsca was born in 1877 in Deva, Transylvania. At that time it was part of Hungary, today it's Romania. I guess, side note, I admittedly thought Transylvania was a fictional place until, embarrassingly recently, so I guess thanks, Tim Curry. But he was born to a wealthy aristocratic family. His father was a member of the Hungarian parliament, they had a whole estate, and in 1895 his sister Ilona discovered dinosaur bones at the family estate in Zaxal, which he shared with Professor Edvard Suess. Suess is the guy who first described the ancient supercontinent Gondwana and the surrounding Tethys Ocean. And this inspired Nopsca to study geology at the University of Vienna in 1897 at the age of 20. And he was a natural. He gave his first lecture in 1899 at the age of 22, and then earned his PhD in geology in 1903. Now, as a Nepo baby, he did earn that PhD mapping the geology surrounding his family estate. In 1906, he met Bajazid Doda in Bucharest and hired him as his secretary. And he would maintain a close relationship with Doda for the next 30 years. In his memoir, Nopsca says, "He has been the only person who has truly loved me and in whom I have full confidence, never doubting for a moment that he would misuse my trust." Because this is 1906, this is apparently a professional relationship. This purely professional rivalry. Doda moved into the Nopsca family mansion. He followed Nopsca around the globe. There is a species of stem turtle from the Cretaceous named after Doda. So yeah, secretary. Now, in addition to his interests in geology and paleontology, Nopsca also had an interest in Albania, which at the time was a province of the Ottoman Empire that was fighting for independence. So he taught himself Albanian and started meeting with members of the Albanian national resistance. In 1907, during an expedition in Albania, Nopsca and Doda were taken hostage by a bandit who demanded ransom, and Nopsca concocts this elaborate escape plan in which he's taken to Prizren as a spy and then gets rescued by Doda's father. And then in 1912, the Balkan states drove out the Ottoman Empire and plunged into a civil war, so Nopsca became a spy for Austria. When Albania rose as an independent state, Nopsca volunteered himself as King of Albania. In fact, he offered to marry a wealthy American girl to solidify his position even though he didn't want to, saying, "Once a reigning European monarch, I would have no difficulty coming up with the further funds needed by marrying a wealthy American heiress aspiring to royalty, a step which under normal circumstances I would have been loath to undertake." He failed to become king, but those side quests would serve him well during World War I, where again he served as a spy for Austria in Transylvania. He was also the first person to commandeer an aircraft, using it to flee the Hungarian Soviet Republic to Vienna. Just a man of many talents. But at the end of World War I, with Austria defeated, Transylvania becomes part of Romania, and Nopsca loses his estate. So he has to get a real job with the Hungarian Geological Institute. As you might expect from a wealthy man with no attention span, he got bored and he left, instead opting to go on a motorcycle journey around Europe with his heavy air quotes secretary, and so he's traveling around Europe studying fossils. Now he is actually a really good paleontologist. He was one of the first to go beyond just the bones and try to understand the physiology and behavior. So he was one of the earliest to suggest parental care and complex social behavior in dinosaurs all the way back in the 1920s, and this wasn't something that would catch on until the 1980s. The dinosaur revolution of the 80s would become an inspiration for the velociraptors in Jurassic Park because it was so recent. He personally coined the term paleophysiology for the study of evolution and physiology, and he also used paleohistology to study physiology of dinosaurs. He was also one of the first to theorize that birds developed from ground-dwelling dinosaurs using a theoretical ancestor he called Proavis. So this was the cursorial evolution of flight. Now, based on current fossil evidence, it's probably a bit more complex than Nopsca thought, but nonetheless pretty impressive. And while most of his contemporaries were looking for the big dinosaurs, think like Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Cope during the Bone Wars, instead he was focusing on the dinosaurs around him in Transylvania, which were much smaller. So looking at a group of 6-meter-long sauropods that he found in the Hatteg Basin, and he called them Magyarsaurus, he concluded that Hatteg Basin was previously an island, and so these sauropods had limited resources. This theory is now known as insular dwarfism. But returning from his travels to Vienna, he found himself in heavy debt because he had more or less just abandoned his job. And so he was forced to sell off most of his fossil collection to the Natural History Museum of London to pay his debts. At the same time, his health began to decline, so by 1928 he was lecturing from a wheelchair. He became profoundly depressed, and in 1933 he slipped Doda a sleeping powder in his tea, and then they both passed away. His ashes were buried alongside his loyal secretary. His memoirs were later found in 2001 and published.